never seen a smile so big on my little Lord lady's face until I tell her I'm going fishing all weekend. Pack up all of my baby, I make plans for 7:45, and I swing around, pick up my date for the weekend. Some reason she seems to please when I'm leaving. There's something I'm missing when I'm gone fishing. When I'm gone fishing. When I'm gone fishing.
Well said, Joe Moore. Happy Labor Day weekend to all of you CFN. Hope you guys had a fantastic weekend. Hope you were out fishing. The weather wasn't so bad. I mean, the rain seemed to come at night, which was okay, depending on where you were. But it was windy, so I don't know if the big water was a place to be. But as I said, lots of backwater opportunities with the weather being somewhat cooperative. But yeah, can you believe it's Labor Day weekend already? Like, holy smokes, where did this year go? Kids are going to be going back to school. Like, holy, as I said, time flies. And the older you get, it seems to fly even quicker. But as I said, hope everybody had a great weekend. How you doing, Eve? Word up, Fernando. How you doing, my friend? Richard Dunlop's in the house. Robbie, how you doing? Cabby's Custom Cheeks. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Christina, how you doing, K-Dog? Curtis Boyle. Well, listen, speaking of Curtis Boyle, I saw a lot of great entries from the Fall Brawl this past weekend. You guys have been hitting it out of the park. Curtis, some great submissions from you. Jeremy's in the house. How you doing? Alexander, how you doing, my friend? Nice to see everybody. Holy, it's a busy, busy day. Getting ready to get back to what hopefully is going to be somewhat of a normal life now that, I don't know, COVID has disappeared. Not. But anyway, it seems like everybody's going to be going back to work. Schools are starting to open up, so maybe their life's going to get somewhat back to normal, but fingers crossed. Fishing hasn't stopped. We have certainly seen a lot of folks out fishing and enjoying the outdoors. That's awesome, because really that's what we should be doing. When there's nothing else to do, opt out and go outdoors. And as I said, what a line. Steve Shaw's in the house. How you doing, Steve? Sean Forchase here, Sally Mitchell, first one in, and Tricia right behind. As I said, hope everybody's had a great weekend. Tonight's topic, if you don't know, is going to be everything smallmouth. Okay, so if you guys have questions as we are talking to our featured guests, by all means, throw them up in the comments. I know Sparkus, you had mentioned that you wanted to help out with that tonight. I really appreciate you reaching out and doing so. Haven't got a lot of announcements, so we want to get right to the fish talk. One other thing, as I said, mentioned the Fall Brawl already. Join Mike and I will be discussing some of your submissions as well as the leaderboard and where people are in terms of their species and species count. But as I said, there's been a lot of junior entries, which is really cool to see. So keep up the great work. The CFN Slush Fund fundraiser. It was supposed to start tonight. Just because of how busy everything is, we are going to be starting it next Monday. So please stay tuned to that. We'll be talking about it right here on CFN. And then subsequent Thursdays following the announcement, we will be talking to a lot of the folks that are donating some incredible prizes and opportunities. Really cool. As I said, whether we raise $5 or $50,000, it's a slush fund that's designed to help a CFNer when a CFNer is in true need. And it's been explained to all of the folks who have very generously donated some incredible prizes. But stay tuned to next Monday. We will be unveiling some of the stuff that you'll be auctioning on and bidding on. And it's going to be really cool. And as I said, the money is going to a great cause because it's going to help out our family some way, somehow. The last thing I wanted to mention, this Thursday coming, circle your calendar. This Thursday, Cameron is back with us, cooking with CFN and Cameron Tate. He's got a walleye dish on the menu. I didn't say it right last week, so I'm not even going to try and butcher it again this week, but we'll have Cameron come on and pronounce it properly. But he actually went out today and caught some walleye. So the fridge is got full fillets ready to be prepared this Thursday. So join us at 8 o'clock for Cooking with Cameron. I don't know. I think that's all that I had for announcements. If there's anything I'm missing, by all means, yes, Robbie, absolutely. James Shembry is the gentleman who is very graciously putting this together. So I know James is on here right now. We will have several charter stocks off. Fantastic, James. Please, Robbie, get in touch with James. He's the one that is putting all the prizes and opportunities together. So I encourage you to reach out to him. Without further ado, I'd like to get right to fish talk. So again, I can't think of a better way to do that than, of course, our commercial. And why don't I have this queued up? I should have this queued up. There it is already. Big Jim's in the house. We're going to get right to him right after this. Big Jim's in the house. How you doing, Jim?
I'm alive now.
Attaboy. Well, that's good.
I
Good
had
to
a couple
know.
of goofy days.
And why's that?
I got food poisoning
Ooh.
on Friday, and we're pretty sure it was from eating eggs from the farm that weren't washed properly. Because everybody else ate the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter just called me. She's with the farmer across the street talking to him. He's an egg guy, and he asked her if she washed the eggs. And she said, I didn't get to the last ones. They usually do. And Tammy said there was 2, and she took 2 fresh ones, put them in the end of the box to give Tammy a dozen. And I ate those 2 Friday at lunch. Had my toast with avocado spread and a fried egg on it,
Yeah.
which is a really good, healthy meal for you. And came to get me, and it lasted it was still there at 6 o'clock this morning, and this afternoon I just popped out of it. So I guess my body eventually took care of it. So haven't had that for about, the last time I had it was probably 15 years ago, and I was going to one of Andy's shows.
Wow.
I was terrified to drive from the house to Toronto.
That's hilarious.
So,
Jim, we're talking bass. This is your forte. This is what you...
What kind of fish?
Smallmouth bass.
What are they?
Well, they're one of your favorite fish. I know you have many, but they are definitely one of your favorite fish. And obviously, smallmouth is something that's interesting. If anybody has joined us on live, it's interesting talking to Jim about back in the day when, it was huge to catch a 3-pound bass. That was a big smallmouth bass. 3 pounds.
Yeah, if you went to a tournament and you brought in 6 smallmouths that were 3 pounds, you were a god. And now you bring in 6 5-pounders, or 5 5-pounders, and yeah, you should maybe have a chance to win. It's
Absolutely.
pretty cool.
That's a great question, Attila, and just hang on to that. When we get to Lawrence and Jay, we're going to talk about the evolution of smallmouth and where they've come from, how they got here, where they've been stocked, where they've been migrating. But with Jim, we want to talk about tackle selection as well as what rod and reel combos that you should be looking for when you're targeting or at least fishing with a certain presentation. So, Jim, I've picked 6 of what I consider the top ways to target smallmouth, and you're going to help us not only with the tackle selection but also what combo, what line strength, what line diameter, do we want a medium fast, a fast heavy type rod? Does it really matter what kind of reel we're using during that kind of presentation? But we're going to start off with the typical blade bait, and blade baits are something that if you have ever fished for smallmouth, you certainly have a few of these in your tackle box. I seem to find, especially in the winter months when smallmouth bass are open, you're targeting them deeper, and these blade baits come in handy. Jim, have you?
Yeah, you know, sorry, I'm gonna stick with a lot of this stuff with a rod that's probably pretty close to 7 foot, depending what you have. And with a blade bait, you know, you're going to want a little bit of tip, but you still want good backbone. A lot of time you're fishing it deep. A lot of time you're making really long casts too. But you still want to be able to feel that bait doing its thing down there. And I think that'd be another one of those things that's I'd probably get by with straight fluorocarbon. You know, you can always go either way. You really can. And you know, if you want to use braid, you don't need to use really heavy braid like 20-pound test with a, you know, like a 10 or, you know, maybe 16-pound test a leader on there is all you need. It doesn't have to be big, because when you're moving something around like that, you're ripping it and it's dropping, ripping it and dropping. It's like using a frog in a slop. Like the fish don't really have a chance to really see it and get on it, you know. And I think that's you know, it's a pretty simple thing, but it's something that a lot of people for some reason just don't do.
Right.
I don't know why. And I know so many people that go out and they buy these baits because they see guys in tournaments with them. And then they go out and they fish it. It was like crankbaits used to be. Like they don't get any respect. And I know some places sell some amazing amounts of these things, but you talk to people and they show you a box and they have all these blade baits in there and they're all brand new, nice and shiny. There's no marks on them. You know, they've never been used. Just the way crankbaits used to be. Like they collect blade baits now.
Yeah,
I got somebody sitting beside me snickering when I said that, so that's good. And it's not the dog.
I was just gonna say that's good. Obviously, next and probably one of my favorite ways to target any kind of fish is soft plastics. Typically, you're using a fluke, you're using a split tail. You know, my favorite, of course, is the paddle tail. That's a North Shore 3.5 inch. Using a jig head, you could use, you know, a 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce, 3/8, doesn't really matter. That is, to me, the easiest way to find fish that are active.
Well, it lets you fish fast, eh, Scotty?
That's the other
nice things about it. And if you use just a little more weight, it'll stay down there longer. Like probably, you know, most of the time you're looking at an 1/8 to 3/8 on the spread on that. And once again, depending on the water, like, or the current, like if you go fishing the St. Lawrence, you might have to use a 3/4 ounce or a 1/2 ounce head to battle the current and to have time to get down in the depth. But primarily, like when I fish soft baits like that, I really in recent years got away from using a spinning rod, and I'm using the bait casting stuff a little bit more. I tend to use it a little more for largemouth and smallmouth because I fish a lot more for largemouth and smallmouth, and you know, that's the way I like to do it. And I'd have to it's hard to. I noticed you had put soft baits and then you talked about drop shot and you had fluff separate. The rod you'd use for those swim baits wouldn't be really as compatible, you know, even if it was a spinning rod to do with drop shot. Drop shot's a whole different thing, but drop shot and fluff you can use the same rods because you have to remember most of the guys that we got here, they're not out in the boat with 26 rods in the boat, so it's trying to get things broken down to what works best for maybe 2 or 3 baits at the same time, and you know, when you manage to do that, it makes it a lot easier. Plus, tournament guys are out there. they may use the same rod for different techniques, but they're not retying the lure every time, or opening up a little snap and changing from a rattle bait to a crankbait to a jerk bait or whatever, So you really have to pay attention to that too. But once again, a rod that's a little bit longer, probably 6'10" to 7, like that Loomis 950 or 983C that I love. That to me is or 893. Yeah, I think it is. That to me is the most versatile rod I've ever put in my hands. So a lot of people may not be able to afford that, or just don't want to put out that kind of money for a rod. So you just have to, if you get a look at that type of rod, and then go look at other rods and find one that has the same actions, and pick up like a Celis or maybe a Curado. We've completely redone the Curado rods, so it's something that's you just have to pay attention to what you're getting and make sure that you don't just. Everybody always says, "Oh, just buy a medium heavy." But it doesn't work like that. Even if you're not going to have 15 rods in the boat or 15 rods on each side. I mean, I know some of the tournament guys, like they have both sides of the boat, and there's 20 rods in each side.
And really, they're just rigged up with different presentations, mostly, right?
Yeah. And a lot of times there's spares. Like
Right.
if you think you're going to, like a lot of guys will rig if you know you're going to be drop shotting a lot, and over the day your leader might shorten up, or you get a tangle or something unforeseen. They don't want to be re-rigging if they don't have to when they're fishing in big tournaments for boats and for $100,000 and that. But you can always take the time to sit down in the boat and do that. So you don't have to have all those different rods. And I think when you just make it a little more fun like that for the average guy too, it's I mean, even now I've got to the point where you'll very seldom see me with two of the same with me.
Right.
Very, very seldom. I try to use things I could double up if I had to. And that's, but when it comes to fluffing and drop shot, and you need something completely different. Now, jerk baits is going to be a spinning rod for sure, and that's a Canadian thing. And if you fish a jerk bait, with a spinning rod, your wrist doesn't get anywhere near as tired or sore as a bait caster. And you can pound that thing all day. I mean, you can just be ripping it. And, I mean, they're called jerk for a reason. Now, you can cast them out and reel them back and catch fish with them, sure. They swim just great, but it's when they're jerking and darting all over the place. It's just strictly it's for an aggressive fish.
Now we're going to be talking a lot of different types of tackle to use and lure selection. But is there a seasonal time for any of the like for instance the blade baits I mentioned? You might want to use those later on in the season when the fish are a little bit deeper, or perhaps throughout the winter. But is there a season to any of these baits that you're discussing, Jim?
Yes and no. Like a lot of these things are like old wives' tales. Like they used to tell us you only caught fish with a jig and pig in the fall. And when I started fishing tournaments, nobody fished with a jig and pig in July or August. Like it had to be the long weekend. Everybody pulled out the jig and pig. We went to Florida. They told us, "Oh, fish in Florida don't eat a jig and pig. It has to be a Texas rig 7/8 worm." And I still remember there was a guy who used to fish with Shimano, and he actually worked for them for a while too, called Wes Laverne. And he went down, and the guy told him, "You should put that away. You're not going to catch anything." And this guy was a pretty good guide that we're in the boat with, and Wes ended up catching like 15 fish that day. The guy fished all day, caught 2. And after that, they, and that's not anybody trying to beat anybody. It was just that he went to his strong point. The thing that he did best was throw a jig.
Right.
So, that's what it works. And then when we get down to spinner baits, crank baits, you can use the same rod for that. I like something a little longer, maybe 7.2, 7.6. If I'm fishing in shallower cover where the lure they're not getting a real good look at it, I'd use straight braid. Otherwise, I'd probably end up with braid and a fluorocarbon leader. A lot of the crankbaits, straight fluorocarbon if the water's really clear and you're away from cover. And once again, that's a personal choice. That's just what I do. And it's, some guys will vary it a little bit, but a lot of it stays the same. And top water, you can sort of get by with the same rod, but I like top water. I like a little more backbone. But see, we usually use braid with top water, so we've been in the habit of using rods that maybe have a little more backbone and are longer now, with just a little bit of tip, or just a little bit of saving grace. Because after we talk about top waters and crankbaits and jerk baits, it's good to have a little bit of tip there and a little bit of saving grace, because they don't always get the lure inside their mouth. They get the lure stuck in their face. And if you have a stiff rod and braid, you don't realize the pressure you can apply. And people get pretty excited when they hook a fish. They start pulling too hard. The number of fish that I've brought to the side of the boat where, you put them in the net and they shake their head on the way in the net and the lure just flies out of their mouth.
Right.
If you would have let it go slack or applied too much pressure, they would have been gone in a second. But the biggest thing out there is drop shotting.
No.
That is like bar none. Like we talked about this a couple of times before, Scotty. And I got a guy sitting beside me here. It's going to take about 10 minutes here or so, and go over drop shotting with you. So if you want to roll over here, they're good looking. And this guy is he's been known to catch the odd fish drop shot.
You said 4 or 5 this year so far. He's got. There he is, the chonger.
Hey, Scotty, how you doing?
Good to see you again, Dave.
Yeah, always good time.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Now, you are the drop shot king. Everybody knows that you love your drop shot. I have a selection of weights here. I call them pencil style weights. You also have the bell weights as well. When do you use what weight when?
Well, so when we started drop shotting, what they told us was use the cylinder weights when you're around weeds, and use the round or the bell-shaped weights when you're around rock. Well, I hated round and bell-shaped around anything because I just found they got snagged way more than the cylinder ones do. So me personally, I use cylinders for everything.
Right.
So I rarely ever, if I ran out of cylinder in a certain weight, I'll put on a ball weight. But now that we're using tungsten drop shot weights, it also makes a big difference too. I don't find that if I use a ball weight that's tungsten, I don't get snagged nearly as often as I do with the lead one, just because I have better feel. I know something's getting rough down there. I can kind of pop it over it and everything. Whereas with lead ones, man, I used to burn through lead round weights like there was no tomorrow.
Yeah.
So me personally, I throw the cylinder for everything.
It's interesting. We had Walter out to the CFN retreat just a couple weeks back, and Walter knew very little about drop shotting just because they don't have a lot of bass in their province that they can target. So drop shotting is foreign to him, and I was doing my best to try and explain it to him. I was using the VMC drop shot where I like to have a little bit lighter line at the bottom where the weight is, so that if you do get hooked up, you're able to break off really easy, and you only got to retie that line. But trying to explain to him how you properly tie it to your fluorocarbon leader, how long of a lead you should have from the weight, this, that, and everything else. I don't know enough about it. And I learned quite a bit from Mark Albeck when we were up there. Tell us a little bit about if you were targeting, say, walleye or bass, what is the ideal setup in, say, no wind condition in terms of weight, size of hook, and what you should be using as a plastic?
Well, my standard drop shot setup consists usually of 10-pound braid. There are guys who, like, for instance, Simon Frost, who's a great smallmouth fisherman. I do believe he's using 5-pound braid. I find 10 it works for me. I will drop down to 8 occasionally, but 10 most of the time. I will go with a fluorocarbon leader that's either 8-pound test or 10-pound test, depending if I'm on the Great Lakes or St. Lawrence, where the fish are just bigger and meaner and stuff like that. I go with a 10-pound. My leader is usually anywhere from, I'd say, 15 to 20 feet, so very, very long. And I almost always start with pretty well a 3/8 ounce, unless I know I'm going to be super shallow. If I know I'm going to be super shallow, I'll go down to a quarter is as light as I'll go down to. But 3/8 generally my starting point. And then if I need more, I'll go to a half or, up to 3/8 or 5/8, thing like that. I've been using, so I know Jim was talking about using the same thing for different presentations and stuff like that. So the hook I use actually is an owner hook. It's called a sniper finesse hook. It's I guess they really designed it for necko rigging. but it's a great drop shot hook. It's very similar. I know a lot of people are using the Gamakatsu Aaron Martin's drop shot hook. Very similar, very similar. They both have that kind of slick, kind of like almost like a Teflon finish to it. A little wider gap. A little slightly longer shank, so it works great if I'm using bigger baits like a swim bait. Sometimes we actually drop. You talk about paddle tails
Yeah.
early on, so quite often we drop shot. A paddle tail swim bait. And baits, well, God, there is drop shot baits galore. You can go. I'd love to say that one would do it for everything. The one I've been using the most lately is the Z-Man trick shot. Um, Couple reasons. Obviously, it catches fish. The other reason is often I use the same bait for the entire day.
Wow.
They stay on there for a long time. But there's so many great baits out there. Well, a lot of Canadian companies make great baits for drop shotting. X Zone probably started it off with the Slammer, and the Slammer is still a great drop shot bait. I saw that Set the Hook is just releasing a new drop shot bait. Looks phenomenal. Their Crush Worm was good before as well. So it's
Yeah.
hard to go wrong. There's so many plastics out there. You can shad shape worm from Yamamoto is a favorite of a lot of guys. So
Yeah.
you
There's
you can you can
the
you can
Mega
drop
Bass.
shot a Senko.
Yeah, there's the same, absolutely, that crush worm from Set the Hook, especially the purple with the it was awesome bait. Angler's Choice, the kill shots, yeah, they're
Kill
great.
shot. Yep. There's
Yeah.
there's another great a great drop shot bait from a Canadian company. So there's don't limit yourself to what you use. Like I said, the one I use the most right now is that Z-Man trick shot because it's super soft, it's buoyant, it sits perfectly horizontal. It's got a little bit of salt in it, but not too much. Of course, I I usually slather it all with liquid mayhem. So you should put some kind of scent, especially when you're drop shotting. Scent, I think it's key. Whether you're using baits that are impregnated already with scent, or if
Right.
you apply it afterwards, it's great. Now my rod setup is a little different from most people, and again, I'm going back to Jim talking about using one rod for multiple presentations and everything. My drop shot rod, the one I use the most often right now, is actually a Daiwa Seth Fighter Neko Rig hair jig rod. So he was talking about using the
Yeah.
same rod for a hair jig and a drop shot. That is so it's a 7.6. It's a light medium, so it's kind of that in between action. But the length of the rod enables me to take up a lot of line with set and hook, and also the parabolic bend of the rod and the 7.6 length. I'm gonna say I'm probably gonna jinx myself. Since I started using that rod, I don't think I've lost any fish over like 4 pounds or over. Big ones, they just stay pinned because, like I said, everything's in my favor. I've got that rod to cushion it. I got the length to set the hook properly. So I got everything in my favor, really. So
Now you just talked about gear. Someone asked, how important is it when you're drop shotting? How in tune to your electronics are you? Are you more feeling bottom, or are you watching what's going on your screen?
you should always be watching.
Okay.
Again, I mentioned Simon Frost earlier. He's the one who taught me how to catch fish off my sonar, and it is cool. It's video game fishing, really. And I would say nowadays when I'm fishing smallies, especially deep smallies, and I see a fish, I'd say it's about a 75-80% chance. If I see it on the sonar, I'm pretty sure I can catch it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, your electronics are super key. I cannot, especially fishing deep. Obviously, if you've got them shallow and you can sight fish them, that's all fine and dandy. But I would say majority of the time when people are drop shotting stuff, they are fishing deeper, and your electronics are essential.
I don't think there's anybody that's watching that would disagree with that. Trying to get Jim back into the conversation as well. I do have to ask the both of you. You guys have been fishing a number of years. If you add the 2 years together, it feeds most of us when it comes to lifetime and
what?
Yes, I know exactly. Outside of electronics, because that's the obvious answer. What in the industry have you seen has been the biggest change when it comes to either baits, gear, anything outside of electronics? What has been the biggest technological advancement?
Let's say it at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Braided line.
Now, someone was
line is absolutely. I would almost kind of throw it in with, you know what? It kind of lumps everything in, but basically equipment.
Yeah.
You know, the lines we have these days, the fluorocarbon lines are so good. The hooks are so sharp. Like, who sharpens a hook out of the package anymore?
Yeah.
Who sharpens a hook? You don't. You don't have to. That's how good they are. And the other thing I'm gonna mention too is, I think for your money right now, the rods and reels you get are just so much better than they used to be. You know, it's you don't have to break the bank to get a top end combo anymore. You know, they are, you know, you can, for instance, you know, when I was talking about the set fighter rod, I don't know, it's $300-ish, you know, and I use a Luvius reel on it because I want something with a super smooth drag, which is again a key factor in it. So it's probably a total about a $600-700 combo, and drop shotting is probably where you want, you know, well, you definitely want the smoothest drag possible. You know, probably most people, when you're finesse fishing, most people, that's going to be their highest end combo.
Right.
All right. And I just think the gear these days is just absolutely mind blowing how good of a combo you can get for, you know, for probably, actually you can probably do one for under $400 or $500.
And really, when it comes to drop shotting and having, you know, the right rod and the right setup.
And then you see me running around sometimes. I'll have an NRX and a Stellar or something because I've got them and can use them or whatever. But you'll see me fishing like the last time Dave and I fished together a couple of years ago in Newborough there. I fished all day with a Celis rod with an $84 spinning reel on it. Every fish I caught came on it, you know?
Yeah. I have to ask, when it comes to braid, does color matter?
Not if you're running a fluorocarbon leader. Yeah. I'm my braid on is a bright yellow sunline braid, like bright yellow. So
yeah, well, you see all Gussie's rods and reels. I asked him one day. I said, "What's with the yellow braid?" He says, "Dude, I just see it better."
Yep.
It's that simple. And with a fluorocarbon leader, it's irrelevant. And then even I do it the odd time. I don't know why we do it. I put on a new line and I get out the Sharpie and I blacken down 3 or 4 feet. But if you asked me what was my favorite color, I had to pick for the rest of my life one color, I'd pick black. So why am I making the line black? Try to hide it from the fish. If it's the color I would pick the most, you know?
Incredible.
Every time I do it, I hear me making that statement in the back of my mind, eh? So, but I still do it. I don't know why.
So top water, we've talked about top water. We've talked about spinners. We've talked about drop shotting. We've talked about jerk baits as well as soft plastics. Jim, I wanted to get your take again. You talk about it so eloquently, but certain presentations, you have the rounded bill, and then you sometimes prefer, you know, a squared bill. Give us situations where we would want to use one or the other.
Square bills with the corners and the edges tend to deflect off things more. Even a lot of the things like that new Jackal Diggle this year, it has a square bill on it almost, and it's a deep diver. Right. So, you know, if it's going to deflect that well, maybe we should just have it on everything. And I played with them out here off the end of the dock a couple of times, and I got them in weed, and you know, you give them a quick little pop, and they come off. The weed comes off. You just let the rod go slack, give it a quick, like a little jerk, and the weed comes off them. In the old days, we'd be out there fishing with, like 12 or 15 pound, 14 pound monofilament, and trying to get weed off a lure was almost impossible. You could jerk a tug all day. Now with fluorocarbon or braid, it's just a little, and it just blows it off. I've done it, watched it in the water in front of me. It's static. You reel it in. You just give it a little pop before you take it out of the water, and you see the weed all explode off it. It just it makes it a lot easier.
Now,
one thing you didn't mention here, Scotty, was rattle baits.
I was you beat me to it, because the one thing Jeanette just mentioned, that she was using the TN60 this weekend, targeting walleye, and she ended up catching a lot of smallmouth. The one thing that seems to be the constant with all crankbaits, hard plastic baits, is the rattle. How important is that rattle when it comes to your presentation?
Next to what they see, sound is number 2. So, it'll draw fish from long distances. Especially if you have a bit of color to the water, it's going to allow those fish to just zone in and target in on the bait better if you have a loud rattle baits are amazing for. I actually was killing pike during pike season on rattle baits this year like crazy.
Is there ever a time where there's too much rattle?
Crystal clear water.
Yeah, crystal clear water.
Or if you're not getting bit.
Yeah, highly pressured fish. Sound could actually spook them. It can, as much as it's most of the time in, like I said, in some stained water, sound is absolutely a positive. If you're in ultra clear water, or the fish are, like I said, super pressured, sound could actually be a negative.
And you got to remember, I fully believe that sound is the last untapped thing. Like, there's things out there, like, the vibrating jigs, the chatterbaits, and stuff like that. That stuff is just proved it because of the different vibrations. You've seen me using talking so much about the Z-Man with the stealth blade.
Yeah. Even
this year out the back, the fish I've caught off it, I just seem to catch more fish. With that stealth blade. Maybe because these fish here are pressured. They see people every day, all summer, sometimes 5 or 10 boats, and it's, I think, sometimes when you just tone it down a little bit, it makes a difference. And you'll see a lot of the square bills now, they have silent models.
Yes.
Yeah. Like our buddy from D-Shine there, Hiroshi, he's got silence and ones with flash and bang too. And they all have their place, and it's just, giving them all a chance.
Well, they have a lateral line for a reason, and that lateral line is like a satellite dish, and it takes in all noises.
That's a good one. I'm stealing that at the Sportsman Show this year.
You go right ahead. It'll be the only thing you'll steal from me, because I have nothing else. My arsenal is empty. Guys, thanks so much for joining us tonight. You've certainly told us and taught us a lot about what it is that we need to get if we don't already have it, and what we might want to think if we're thinking outside of the box to try our next time going out. So both to you, Dave and Jim, thanks for joining us. Thanks for everything, and we really appreciate your time.
The secret, once again, if it ain't working, stop doing it.
Amen. Simple and plain. I love it. Take care, gents. Thanks again for your time.
Take care now. Enjoy, buddy.
Take care, Scotty. See ya.
Well, I'll tell you this, at the end of the day, if they didn't answer any of your questions, by all means, throw them in the comments. They'll get to them. I guarantee you'll get to them. But that was a lot of information. And now we're going to find out with Lawrence certain things that are going on with smallmouth from a political standpoint, as well as from anglers' choices. Also, he's got a Feel the Bite segment. But before we get to that, let's have a word from our sponsor.
When it comes to Canadian food, we've got your back with flavors like lemon pepper, beer batter, campfire barbecue, lemon pepper dill, garlic butter and chives, and crispy Cajun. We've got a mix for every meal. Whether you're serving East Coast shrimp, West Coast salmon, succulent walleye, chicken wings, or veggies, we've got you covered. Coat your food in outdoor flavors. Available online or at these fine retailers.
Lawrence Gunther in the house. How you doing, Lawrence?
I'm doing well, man.
Fantastic. Listen, your Feel the Bite segment, I think we should probably start with it.
Yeah.
First of all, happy long week, Labor Day long weekend to you and your family.
Thanks, and you too.
Hopefully you're enjoying it as well as everybody else in CFN land. Our drop shot presentation. I asked Dave when it comes to weights, which ones he prefers. I call them pencil weights. Some will call them cylinder weights. What do you prefer? Do you prefer the bell weights or do you prefer the cylinder weights for drop shotting?
I use them both. Like Dave, the pencil weights are less likely to get stuck in a crevice between some rocks, right? They're just a thinner profile. But when I want to really feel what's down there, I find the ball weight, when you drop it down, it doesn't hit on an angle and tip over. So if you're dropping a pencil weight down on the bottom and it hits, they always hit just a bit on an angle and it never hit perfectly straight down. So what happens is they hit on an angle, the bottom touches, and the thing tips over. So you don't really get a true sense of the feel of what's on the bottom when you're dropping down with a pencil weight. You get this sort of double to bunk, right? With a ball weight, it's a bunk. And so I like the ball weight for understanding what's really on the bottom.
So, I asked Dave how important electronics are for him, and obviously they're crucial. He loves targeting, as do most of us, fish that you can actually see on the screen, and the ability to catch them. Like that's the true reward, is when you're able to finally hook something that you can see. That's the ultimate experience. Now, in your case, it's a little bit different. Are you feeling bottom, or your electronics that up to speed that you're able to have a sensory determination that there's a fish below you? How does it work for you?
When you're fishing in the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, and you're moving around, it's midsummer. The fish are suspended. They're solo actors. They're out there in 60 feet of water and they're 20, 30 feet down. You have no choice but to use your sonar. You're moving around. You're searching. You see one. You drop down to it. You hook it. It's like that. There's one person on the boat catching fish because midsummer they're moving around. They busted up. They're not on the bottom. But I learned to drop shot 15 years ago from a guy named Charles Sims. He's an amazing angler. For a while there, him and his partner had the Ontario record, I think the Canadian record for the largest bag of smallmouth bass ever, just over 30 pounds of 5 fish caught on the St. Lawrence River, drop shotting. Yeah, and he taught me something, and I've learned this from other pros as well. Largemouth bass and smallmouth bass respond differently when you're drop shotting. With a largemouth bass, I've seen guys take little bits of bungee, little strands of bungee, and connect it from their hook to the weight, and then leave the weight on the bottom, and then they can bungee their bait. And especially if you're fishing bedding fish, post spawn fish, you can just keep it in the zone. It doesn't. Every time you pull it back, it bounces back. The more aggressive, the more violent that bait's moving around with largies, they love it. They love it. That's why you can drag drop shots for largemouth bass. You can pound them. You can drop them up and down. You can move a lot of action into them. You can do that with a medium heavy rod or a medium rod. You can use any spinning rod or casting rod to do this, really, because they're going to come out and smash it.
Right.
But with a smallmouth bass, it's exactly the opposite. You don't move it. You don't move it. And that's why they started making drop shot rods with these really parabolic tips, because it's dead weight. You can't move it. If you start moving it, you scare them off. So you have to throw it out there, feel the bottom, say, okay, I'm not in the weeds. I'm on a good spot in the bottom. And then you wait. And then that soft tip, when the fish picks it up, and I'd say 70% of the time a smallmouth will pick it up, you won't know. You'll just see your rod tip go straight because a little pressure's off the line, or you'll see it come down a little bit because it's moving away with your bait, but there's no thunk, right? So then you lift it up, you feel that sort of heaviness. You feel that heaviness, and it's got it. It's got your bait in its mouth. That's the bite with a smallmouth bass. You move it around, you jig it, you drag it, you're not catching fish. You throw it out there, you let it drop to the bottom, you wait. And then if you don't catch anything, you just reel it in and try a different spot. There's no point dragging it along the bottom for smallmouth bass. You're not going to catch anything that way. Maybe, you'll catch it on the drop when there's a whole bunch of smallmouth bass schooling around. One will come up and grab it as it's dropping down. And there'll be a little bit of competition, when it hits the bottom. But if you're going after solo characters midsummer where they're sort of moving around and just one at a time, and it's absolutely, the stiller the better. And that's where you get these hand pour plastics come into effect. These super soft plastics that move around just in the current, just that little bit of movement of the water current just undulates the plastic a little bit. That's all the motion you want.
That's great advice. You hit it on the head right there, my friend. Now that you've talked about drop shot for Feel Your Bite segment, I do have to get you to weigh in on the political side of smallmouth bass.
Man.
Unfortunately, as much as they are the pound for pound favorite for a lot of anglers, they are not viewed as such out in our Atlantic provinces, especially out in New Brunswick. There is a particular river where there is quite a battle going on which fish should be there and remain there. Give us if an update is warranted, or just give us a little bit of what you've learned about the struggles of the smallmouth out on the Miramichi River.
The Miramichi, yeah. People love smallmouth or they hate them, right?
Yeah.
They love them or they hate them. They say they're, all through Atlantic Canada, you have these beautiful lakes that were stocked with brook trout for many, many, many dozens of years. Even though brook trout are an invasive species, they were put there on purpose. They did well in these lakes. They had no natural enemies, predators, until smallmouth came along. And how the hell did smallmouth get out there in the first place? No, the eggs did not stick to the feet of ducks. They were brought, and everyone knows this, in white buckets by anglers who said, hey, man, I want some of these hard fighting fish in my lake. And they would catch some, put them in a bucket, bring them home, let them go in their lake. And, prolific things that they are, and ferocious, they don't get eaten easily, but they certainly can eat everything else in their ecosystem. So, yeah, Miramichi, that's one of the top Atlantic salmon rivers in New Brunswick. They're now looking to get a permit to eradicate the smallmouth bass by introducing poison into that river. They were just about to get their permit and do it this summer. This has been going on for 2 years now. And then the First Nations community said they said, that seems a little drastic. You want to poison and kill everything in the river? Maybe there's a better way of doing this. It was the Atlantic Salmon Federation's fault for not consulting with this First Nations community and explaining to them how they were going to do it and how they tried everything else and how this was the only thing left in their arsenal. But that's just one isolated situation. There's tons of property owners, tons of anglers out there that just, they just don't have a love affair with smallmouth bass in Atlantic Canada. It's just not part of their DNA. It's not what they grew up with. They just see them as hideous invaders. And the same thing all across Ontario, Northern Ontario, all the way out to Thunder Bay. And I know Jason's going to get into some of this, but, when you have seasons for smallmouth bass with no limits that go 12 months a year, it's pretty obvious that what the regulators are doing is saying, cull the fish. Right?
100%.
Yeah.
Great segue. I think we'll bring Jay in at this point because there's a lot that, perhaps we don't know about smallmouth. For one, where did they come from? Are they native? Are they invasive? Are they always invasive? So let's bring in Jay to fill us in on what it is that you need to know.
Hey guys.
Smallmouth. How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing great. I was just going to look something up here. Hold on. Got to go to my handy library. So
smallmouth. The scientist.
Yeah.
What is it, Kizzle?
You know what? I'll be honest, guys. My boss, I had a manager's or OSH meeting last week, and one of the managers says, Jason, when you tune into an OSH staff meeting, we're not sure if we're going to get a fishing seminar or some sort of biological lecture. And I said, I want to keep you guys hanging every time I talk to you. So this is actually I should be able to find this pretty quick in here. So this is ROM Field Guide for Freshwater Ontario Fishes. Okay, they actually just came out with a different version of this, and if you want to learn fish ID for Ontario fishes, and in fact most of Canada, because Ontario has the greatest diversity in Canada, so most freshwater species you'll find in this book are covered off. But you know what? I'm going to look in here. Let's see. Centrarchidae. There's largemouth bass. Let's see what else we got. Smallmouth. Hold on. I'm almost there. I should know this off by heart. Smallmouth. Okay. Smallmouth bass. There is the distribution map right there. You guys see that?
Yep.
So there's two different colors there, okay? So smallmouth bass are native to the Great Lakes. That sort of green color is their native distribution. And that sort of gray color is where they were actually introduced in Ontario, where they were stocked into lakes inland. So I'm going to tell people may not realize this, but in Algonquin Park, that was the first stocking of smallmouth bass pretty much recorded in Ontario. And I'm going to read this excerpt from this report I have in Algonquin Park. So lakes in Algonquin Park that were previously stocked. Bass was the first fish species to be stocked in the park beginning in 1899 when 500 individuals were released in the Cache, Tanamacoon, and Source lakes from a population out of Parry Sound. Those were the first bass stocked in Algonquin. And the way bass were stocked across those introduced areas was primarily by rail, by train. The bass were loaded up into rail cars, and the train would stop at the lake. And that's how they introduced bass to, the areas of Ontario where they're not native, into inland lakes.
So it didn't take a lot of fish. I mean, if they had, a train going and they would just stopping every so often and tossing 100 or so, 50 or so fish in, it doesn't take money, does it? No, it doesn't. And like smallmouth, like they're voracious. Like all the sunfish species, especially smallmouth and largemouth, but that includes black crappie. Black crappie, they're all part of the Centrarchidae family. Black crappie, I remember in the I'm going to date myself, 1995, I was the Creel survey monitoring technician for Rice Lake for M&R, and we were catching a few black crappie. They were just coming into Rice Lake in the early 90s. Now they're all through the Trent Severn. But 10 years before that, what was the new species? Bluegill. Bluegill aren't native to the Trent Severn. They came through Lake Ontario, up the Trent River, and they're native to the Great Lakes, but they came in through the Kawarthas. That's a naturally expanded population, which is what I'm trying to say. A lot of these species expand their range naturally if given the opportunity. Now, naturally could be taken a little different because we artificially augmented the system with dams, right, and locks, and so those fish came through those systems. But they do find ways. In glacial times, like the smallmouth are native to the Great Lakes, and when glaciers receded, fish had to invade new areas. As glaciers receded and waterways allowed, fish worked their way in, and smallmouth bass and their cousins, they are notorious for getting around. And Lawrence hit it exactly. They've had great help, but they've also done it on their own. They are just they're a survivor. They really, truly are a survivor, but they cause problems to our native stocks. And the biggest issue in Ontario, we can, Lawrence touched on some of the issues in the Miramichi. In Ontario, they're really hard on native brook trout and lake trout in some of our classic Canadian shield lakes. And actually, a cousin of the smallmouth is probably the worst offender for impacting native trout populations, or char. They're both char, is rock bass. They are nasty. They eat a lot of juvenile salmonids in those inland lakes. And so when rock bass get in, they really do a number. So, but a lot of times it's artificial, but they do move around on their own. They're pretty good at it if given the chance.
Now, typically, I would consider smallmouth bass sort of a cool water fishery. They like the deeper, cooler water. Lately, I mean, especially in the Kawarthas, you're seeing them in those higher temps and thriving in some of those higher temp lakes. So are they just an adaptable fish, or is the science not correct in its belief that they are a cool water species?
Well, the thing about smallmouth is
you find them in the weed beds now too, right? Like you think you're going to get largemouth in a weed bed, and there comes the smallmouth.
Yep. It's not uncommon now to go to the Kawartha lakes and you find a good rockweed mix and you're flipping a jig around. You don't know what bass you're going to catch, right? A lot of that though is with smallmouth guys is it's climate change. Their distribution will naturally progress north if given the chance, because as lakes warm, and I'm not going to get into a debate about climate change, but as lakes warm, those bass, largemouth and smallmouth, will win the race, the evolutionary race in these places. They're just that adaptable. So if they get the chance, they're going to move in and they're going to do well in these places. And where they do well, Scotty, and you hit it on the head, is in these oligotrophic lakes, right? Like Canadian Shield lakes that are very nutrient poor. Those smallmouth will, if given a chance, will sustain themselves. And we saw that in Algonquin Park 2 weeks ago. Like, we were in the far back country in a lake where smallmouth were rumored to be, and I was sharing a campsite with two fellow biologists who work for M&R, and we're good friends. Our families are good friends. And we were joking at the campfire the first night about, well, what if someone catches a smallmouth? Well, sure enough, I'm trolling for lake trout in 5 colors of lead core on a diving crankbait. So I'm down 35 feet on a shoal, and what did I catch? Like a 4-pound smallie. And the next pass, I got a lake trout the same size, right? They're survivors. You know, I'll give them credit. They're a surviving fish, but they provide so much opportunity for anglers, and they survive so well. And I think that's why they were selected to be stocked in some of these lakes to provide more opportunity. But they were stocked right on top of lake trout and brook trout populations. But the stocking ceased in the mid 1900s. But like we know that once fish get into a lake or a river, to eradicate them is really, really hard.
So is there anywhere in Ontario? I mean, obviously the jury's out when it comes to our Atlantic provinces. Some would consider them invasive. Anywhere here in Ontario or anywhere else across Canada that we would consider smallmouth to be an invasive species?
Yeah, like there's just sort of areas like outside of Ontario. There's kind of areas where I think they've been stocked. Trevor and I were talking about this on the drive home tonight from Bob Cajun. He was looking at Master Angler Awards for Manitoba. And now this isn't smallmouth, but he said, Dad, do you know what the Master Angler Award for Manitoba is? I'm like, what is it? He goes, 14 inches. Now, he wants to drive to Manitoba and catch a 14-inch largemouth so he can claim a Master Angler Award because he thinks 14-inch largemouth are easier to catch. And I go, I'll bet you the largemouth, and I'm pretty sure without looking it up, they're quite rare in Manitoba. That's why that number is so low. But smallmouth, they're all through that northwestern Ontario, up through the Winnipeg River, and they're in the Mississippi. So I'm not sure how far north their distribution is, but I do, talking even some of the shows we've had here, Scotty, with the CFN and our colleagues out in the prairies, there are smallmouth, but they're so, I'm not sure if they were stocked out there in certain places, but they're pretty rare. Outside of the Great Lakes Basin, they're very rare. But anywhere from Superior out the St. Lawrence, and then basically all the way, any rivers in Quebec, even in the lower mainland of Quebec, where it hugs New York and Vermont and New Hampshire, those are all bassy waters all through there. So
Jason, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Most CFNers have fished for both largemouth and smallmouth, but in your mind, what sort of 5 ways are smallmouth different than largemouth in the way they behave and the way they predate and move around and spawn? So
I think that smallmouth are more pelagic. They're more roaming. I think they're harder. They're pretty easy to predict where they might be. And what I say by that is, let's say we go to a lake. We know they're smallmouth, and we're going to see a nice rock pile. We're going to go to that rock pile, and we're probably going to try and target smallmouth on that rock pile. They're very predictable in their habits. In saying that, they also move a lot. They follow bait. They follow a lot of pelagic bait, if given the chance. In some lakes, like even in St. Clair, they still heavily prey on crayfish. The crayfish populations in St. Clair are still doing pretty good, and goby as well. And so smallmouth in a lot of the Great Lakes, I don't think roam as much as they used to. But historically, they're a roaming fish, Lawrence. I believe that they are, and they school up and they wolf pack around and they hoover up all the prey in the area, and then they just move on. And when you talk to a lot of Bassmaster elite pros and FLW pros that fish St. Clair, they talk about these moving pods of smallmouth, because Lake St. Clair is a big bowl, and there is some structure out there, you know, whether it be rocks, scattered rocks, or bottom transitions, or grass sand transitions. All of those places will hold fish, but these are like subtle transitions, and so the bass really move around a lot in St. Clair, unlike Erie, where I think there's just a lot more structure for them, and they become a lot more predictable. But they still roam, and that's why they do well in these inland lakes, because they have no problem going out deep to feed on things like Cisco, and you know, these deep water forage species that largemouth probably won't be able to take advantage of because those lakes are just too cold for them in Canadian waters.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Atalo brings up a great question. Isn't the smallmouth study in Algonquin the longest running study in the world?
It is, and I'm not even sure if they're still doing the work. I was actually, I won't lie. So today I was fishing, and I sent Scotty a message, and I go, having some challenges today with my buddy's vehicle. Not sure if we're going to make it on the call tonight, but I said, what's the topic? I want to do a little reading, and I actually found a great paper from that very study, long-term study. Attila's bang on. Mark Ridgway, who is a colleague of mine and I consider a friend. I love to catch up with some of these guys from time to time. Let me read you a little bit about this abstract that him and Corey Susky, another colleague of mine. Corey is a researcher out of Illinois now, but he cut his teeth with smallmouth bass in Ontario, working with Ridgway, Dr. Bruce Tufts, and Steve Cook, and a few others. Let me read you. Anglers are going to love this. This is really good angling information from a scientific angle, okay? At annual scale, smallmouth bass demonstrate regular seasonal changes in their depths. Fish typically occupied shallow water during the summer, 2 to 5 meters in depth, and then descended deeper, 12 to 15 meters in depth during winter. Smallmouth bass would remain above the thermocline in summer. Seasonal depth patterns did not vary across fish size. Further, at a finer scale, smallmouth bass exhibited, this is out of Opeongo Lake in Algonquin, smallmouth bass exhibited diel, vertical migration. So what diel is during the day, okay, so from day to night, they observe vertical migrations in bass in summer, with fish moving to less than 2 meters at night and then descending 3 to 5 meters during the day. And it doesn't, I think they said this pattern remained constant during the summer period and varied with size, such that larger fish tend to remain deeper than smaller fish. And now, what is causing this movement of fish to the surface at night versus the day? It doesn't go in here to say, but I'm going to guess it's because of the forage basin. The forage basin, Opeongo, a lot of it is Cisco's. And Cisco's, what they'll do is Cisco's like to feed on inverts, and they will actually come up above the thermocline and feed at night, and then go back down during the day. And lake trout and brook trout will follow them through that water column, and as will walleye and other predators. And I think that's what smallmouth are doing in Opeongo, is they're probably following those Cisco movements. But through most of the summer period, when we're angling for them, the majority of fish are between 3 to 5 meters, so 9 to 15 feet. In Opeongo, they have depths of hundreds of feet. Like, those bass are in a very small area in Opeongo. If you can find 3 to 5 meters of water in Opeongo with some cover and some forage, you're going to catch bass.
And it's amazing to me too, getting to that transition in the water column, that how far a smallmouth will chase a bait. Hearing stories about folks that are using jerk baits in 50 feet of water.
Yeah.
And these bass are coming out of the depths to attack these jerk baits. Truly, again, just yet another example of why these fish are so fun to catch, because they'll chase anything at any time, and they're aggressive as heck.
A good example of that, Scotty, is a few years ago I was fishing on the Ottawa River near the Chalk River nuclear plant, and that stretch from Chalk River up to Deep River is really deep, pretty fast flowing water through there, and it's a fantastic fishery. You have northern pike, muskie, walleye, smallmouth, great fishery, and channel cats. Well, when I was up there that particular summer, pre-fishing for that event, what did we see near the nuke plant? And I don't think it's because of the nuke plant. We just were fishing. There's actually great weeds along that side of the river. There was a lot of small dead smelt. And I scooped them up actually with our net, and I'm like, those are smelt. Now, smelt are an invasive species, but they're common in a lot of our deeper water lakes across central Canada, really. Well, these smallmouth were busting on smelt over 100 feet of water. So we would be fishing the shore, okay? And we're in 20 feet of water, and literally, not too much of a cast, let's say half a cast, we're pitching a drop shot or pitching a tube up along the weed edge. And then all of a sudden, over your shoulder, over 100 feet of water, you'll hear splash, splash, splash. You'll turn around, and there's smallmouth. And so what one of our patterns was, we'd have a jerk bait. So I would have a jerk bait. My partner might have a popper or a spook. And as soon as we heard that, you'd grab that and fire it out, like basically into no man's land. And that's how we caught most of our bigger smallmouth. But it was random. You didn't know when it was going to happen. And I've seen this happen in Lake Muskoka, like a lot of the Muskoka lakes, Lake of Bays, Lake Muskoka. I've seen it on the Ottawa River, and this happens everywhere where there's smallmouth. They just cover so much ground in Ontario waters and Canadian waters than a largemouth does. I'm not going to say they're more adaptable, because largemouth are too. I just think that our climate is really suited for big smallmouth, and a lot of them. I think it really is.
I agree. And as I said, one thing that you touched on just now is something that is certainly changing when it comes to angler etiquette. I know it's typical for all of us to, grab the net. When you see somebody fighting a smallmouth and the rod is bent over, in a lot of cases, the best thing to do is not to grab the net, but grab, as you said, a plastic fluke, something that suspends in a water column, and throw it out, because if there's one, there's usually two or three following it.
And that's the thing about smallmouth. Like I was listening to a podcast this morning driving up. That exact same thing happened. So Trevor, what's his name? Trevor Manson. He does the Smallmouth Crush podcast. If you love smallmouth bass fishing, look up Smallmouth Crush podcast. Dave's been a guest on there. Derek Strube. Lenny DeVos. Like, there's so many great anglers, and a lot of great Canadians have been on Smallmouth Crush podcast. And if you love smallmouth fishing, do yourself a favor and listen to this podcast. So the gentleman that was being interviewed today out of Michigan, this is the story that he told when he guides. So Scotty, he totally takes advantage of that crazy instinct that smallmouth have. And we see this so much with smallmouth and not with largemouth. I find largemouth are more solitary creatures, where smallmouth are more schooling creatures. So what he does is he goes out in Lake Erie in, like, I think it was less than 10 feet of water. He likes to throw a crankbait. So he's throwing a crankbait out. And what he likes to do is, when you're fishing with him, you each throw your crankbait at the same time. Okay? They both hit the water. Then one person starts the retrieve. And then after 3 or 4 cranks, the other person starts the retrieve. In a lot of situations, if you hit the school, you both double header. You both will double up, okay? Now, here's the trick. Before he starts this cast, he dangles. Now, he's allowed 2 lines, okay? There's a legal thing here, but I'm going to tell you what he does. He dangles 2 lines in the water, 2 tubes, and they're about halfway down in the water column already beside the boat. He actually puts the rod tip on the edge of the boat, so those tubes are straight down. As he's bringing the fish to the boat, he'll reach down and open the bail on one of those tubes, on both tube rods, and the tubes will fall to the bottom. And he said this has happened multiple times. They'll have 2 4 to 5 pound class smallmouth on these crankbaits, scoop them in the net, and you look over, and the line is streaking off these other 2 rods because those tubes are on the bottom. So then they set the hook on those, and they have 2 more smallmouth coming in the boat. So that's, and he's talking, of course, he's an angler, so I don't know how truthful it is, but to imagine catching 16 to 20 pounds of smallmouth in the matter of a minute on 4 casts. And in Lake Erie or Lake St. Clair or St. Lawrence River, it's possible. Very possible.
Last question I have for you, Lawrence, unless you have another one as well. When it comes to distribution of fish, obviously huge weather events have an effect on it. When we have flooding, torrential downpours. I think it was Jeanette that asked about fighting forest fires. Were any of these fish possibly transferred in those planes that we see from time to time landing in lakes to fill up their the tubes with water to then dump on the fire? Has fish distribution resulted from any of that?
Sorry, I was responding to a question.
Okay.
Let's start again. Sorry, I thought you were asking Lawrence a question, not me.
I can't imagine, like, if they were filling up and then landing in another body of water, say for the day, right? Like if they were coming out of one lake and then landing in another lake, and they still had some, some small fish aboard or some, some fry. But if they're dumping it onto forest fires, or it could be getting into a river, right? It could be getting into a small river that's feeding into a lake, and that gets dumped into that. So for sure, I think it could happen. You could definitely transfer fish with these water bombers.
Definitely, and I think that's. I'm going to bet, without looking it up, just knowing how agencies work, I'm going to bet it's part of their risk assessment, where they're looking at, okay, we have to, we're losing our resources here with forest fires. There's also risk to human life and human property. We need to put them out. We're going to scoop fish up with these planes. It's going to happen. These fish are going to get dropped. Maybe there's a creek in that area. The chance of them hitting another lake is pretty small. But even in Lawrence, even your comment before about heron's feet and duck feet, some of the studies have been done where they show that eggs can remain viable for periods of time on a duck's foot. And I used to be the person who's like, this duck foot question. Get out of here. Get out of here with the duck foot question.
I was reading a study the other day, and they tested for that, and they said it doesn't work. Some scientists said they had no conclusive proof, but it's one study, right? One study does not prove a theory or disprove a theory.
Yeah. So I've read that the eggs could remain viable. Now, I wasn't sure if it was for bass, but anyways, like, anything's possible. Like, so with the water bombers, 100% possibility that they could be transferring fish. But will those populations, transference of fish? Yes. Where are those fish being transferred? Probably onto the ground.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lake, right? So that's my guess on it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think that map you showed, Jason, where there were natural smallmouth, native, and then where they were put through deliberate sort of stalking, legitimate, government sanctioned stalking, that second color, I think that what that map needed was the third color. Where have they shown up for no known reason other than, fish feet or anglers with white buckets or whatever? That's the third color. And I would like to see how big a span that is.
Actually, Lawrence, I don't have it handy, but I know that federally there was a risk assessment done on smallmouth bass in Canada. And it was done to look at the risk of, this has been done for lots of species. Because when you have species that can be introduced and can cause problems, different agencies want to look at the species and be like, hey, what are the risks? Are there risks? We keep hearing about the risks. Are there actual risks? And there's been risk assessments done on some of the most common. I'm pretty sure northern pike's been done, smallmouth bass, and they looked at populations across Canada, where they are, where they're not, where they've been introduced, where there are problems, out east, out west, even in Ontario. There's a reason why there's an open bass season north of the Trans-Canada in zone 10 and 11 in Ontario. Because
year round.
Yeah, because above the Trans-Canada, that's kind of the line that's been drawn to make it relatively easy for anglers. That's my understanding. Is those are native lake trout lakes, and so they want to encourage anglers. Gord Pizer said it before. Let's anglers do the jobs of the agency staff, right? We're going to do some control. Now I think for the most part, a lot of anglers are practice catch and release. They're not harvesting a lot of those bass, but that's why they've increased opportunities for bass, but they've done it to protect or help to enhance native lake trout in a lot of those lakes.
Well, gentlemen, it's we've gotten past the hour. I want to thank you both for everything that you've brought to the table. Jay, just getting home safely was your goal tonight, but the fact that you're able to come on here was just the gravy on top of the mashed potatoes. Lawrence, as always, dude, you always bring us a wealth of information as well. I can't thank the two of you enough. And apparently we have to thank Santa Claus for Smallies now being out west, as Jim would mention here.
Has Jim been stalking smallmouth out west?
Yes. I don't think there's enough lakes with smallmouth, in his opinion. 100%. Gentlemen, we will do a poll. Yeah, absolutely. We'll do a poll. I may start it perhaps tomorrow on what our topic species is going to be for next week. I know salmon was a very close second to smallmouth last week, but anyway, we will launch the poll and we'll see what our community wants to talk about next Monday. But until then, guys.
Now, Scotty, I got to give one shout out. Okay, so my dad was recently in hospital. Everything's fine, but while I was in there, he said to me, he says, "Jay, you have been on television on the fishing show." And I'm like, "What are you talking about, Dad?" He goes, "The cleaning lady, Julie, talks about, she read my name on the chart and said, your son, I watch your son on fishing shows. He's on there like every week." And while I was there, Julie came in the room and I said, "Hey, Julie, I'm Jason. Nice to meet you." And she says, "Yeah, my husband and I like to watch that CFN live show on YouTube. But I just had to tell your dad that I see you on there all the time." So, Julie, if you're watching, thanks for watching CFN live, and thanks for taking care of my dad and keeping him company in the hospital.
Yeah, all good. Great shout out, fantastic shout out. Good job, Julie. Keep up the great work, and as I said, you two stay classy. We'll see you next Monday.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Right on. Two real gems right there. As I said, we were joined tonight by Dave Chong, another gem that taught us a lot about drop shotting. Jim, as always, he loves talking bass. Love having him around. His stories of how it was in yesteryear certainly paint a picture that makes it look very bright for our fishing futures. For all of you who joined tonight, thanks so much. We will set up the poll to find out what species you want to talk about next Monday. Until then, we will see you tomorrow. Tourney Tuesday, Mike and I will be on with all the updates and hopefully a leaderboard update on where folks are at, as well as Thursday. Stay tuned. Cooking with Cameron Tate, and he has walleye. He went out and caught them for us today. Join us on Thursday at 8 o'clock, and he's got quite the walleye dish. Till then, guys, have yourselves a great week. Love you all. Stay safe, and may your tips be bent and your line wet. All the best. Take care.